Welcome to this webinar on Structuring Extended Writing, how to strengthen your approach to writing essays and dissertations. So, you want to write better. This video is great for those who are doing a dissertation research project as part of their Extended Project Qualification or EPQ, need to write a compelling essay for any research or school project, want to learn how to structure a convincing argument, want to understand how to back up a claim, and want to learn how to organise and plan a good essay or dissertation. In this video, we'll cover the following points. What is an essay or dissertation really? Skills you'll get from essay and dissertation writing. What is the difference between creative and academic writing? How to structure an essay or dissertation. What are the steps to writing a convincing essay or effective dissertation? Structuring convincing arguments and addressing counter-arguments, and how to write a compelling introduction to make your conclusion come full circle. Let's start with the basics. What is an essay or dissertation really? You will likely have written quite a few essays by now, but when was the last time you really thought about the purpose of essay writing or writing a dissertation-style research project? The main function of an essay or dissertation is to discuss your hypothesis or research question in an organised way, so that it's easier for the reader to follow your train of thought. You want to convey a clear and convincing message using evidence to support your claims. A good piece of argumentative writing will, therefore, include references to credible sources and reputable thinkers that are relevant for your topic. You should always provide sufficient background on your subject and demonstrate existing evidence or thinking for your reader to follow the arguments. It is often good to show both sides of an argument, as it can help build your case if you can respond to counter-arguments too. Most of all, a great essay or dissertation should have a clear and logical structure. An argument that is easy to follow is always more convincing because your reader can see the logic in your thoughts. Writing essays and dissertations are designed to test and improve your critical thinking. There are many skills that you'll gain from academic writing. You'll learn how to organise and structure your ideas. It will help you identify main arguments, both as you plan your writing, but also in text, written by others. This will help you find the main message in any given text more quickly. That means that writing essays or dissertations will also improve your analytical skills. You'll learn how to make convincing arguments and improve your writing skills. You'll get better at communicating your research, and it will improve your organisational skills too. If you're doing an EPQ, you will be writing an essay-style dissertation research project. A dissertation in this context is just a well-structured essay that is a bit longer than your usual school paper. For your EPQ dissertation, although there is no strict word limit, it's recommended to have a word count of around 6,000 words, that is, about 10 pages. In order to write a great dissertation, you'll need to identify your research question, develop your own independent plan for your dissertation research, collect and analyse information from credible sources, rely heavily on secondary sources, that is, sources such as books, newspapers, that provide non-original or second-hand data or information. Engage in a process of argument with consideration of counter-argument too. Interpret evidence and draw conclusions. And lastly, evaluate and review your own work. Doing a dissertation research project is a great exercise in academic writing, and it could come in handy in many university assignments in future too. Let us look now at how academic writing differs from creative writing. Creative writing can take many forms. It can be short, long, and defy convention. It's often based on personal experience, opinions, ideas, or emotions. Creative writing can also be entirely fictional. Academic writing, on the other hand, has a clear and organised structure. It's evidence-based, and that evidence must come from concrete sources. In academic writing, the author has the burden of proof. In other words, you have to show that what you're saying is supported by facts. It can also have standardised limits. For the EPQ dissertation research project, for example, it can be around a 6,000 word limit. Lastly, ideas must be explained and questions must be answered. Your goal first and foremost is to use the essay or dissertation to answer your all-important research question. as discussed in our previous video of the what, the why, and the how of research projects getting started. From this point on, we will start distinguishing between essays and dissertations. Let us start with essays. The first thing you need to understand is how an essay is structured. We can use a burger analogy to demonstrate how to build your essay, like a burger. The first thing you see when you look at the burger is the bun. In your essay, that's the introduction. It's where you present your topic and highlight your methods so that your reader knows what they're about to read. But you also want to grab your reader's attention so that they want to continue reading. Just as with the burger, the most important decision you make is when it comes to planning your essay is what to fill it with. This part is called the main body. It's where you present and discuss your main arguments and provide evidence to support them. Each new thought, which in an argumentative essay is often a new argument, gets its own paragraph. Each new filling in your burger adds a taste, and when you remove one of them, you alter the whole experience. The same is true for your arguments. They have to work well together and tell one coherent story. The bottom of the bun of your burger may not seem like the most important part, but your burger wouldn't be complete without it. Your conclusion is not different. A good conclusion will pick up the theme from your introduction, restate your research question, show how you answered it, and then stress the importance of your work. In order for your reader to get a fully rounded experience, all parts have to align, but it's the conclusion that will leave the lasting impression, so never underestimate its value. Writing a great essay takes planning, so give yourself enough time to organise your thoughts. It'll be worth it in the end. Here are 5 steps that you can follow when you plan your essay. Every academic endeavour starts with research. You want to find out as much as you can about your topic so you can present as full a picture as possible. The first thing you want to do is identify your main arguments. This process often goes hand in hand with the second step, finding proof. Sometimes your main arguments will come from your opinions and reading about the topic, but other times you may find a good piece of evidence in your research that will spark a new idea. Both strategies are equally effective. Your main goal is to find convincing arguments. The third step is to organise your arguments. This may seem trivial, but it is one of the most important steps in writing your essay. If you want to present a coherent story, every argument has its time and place. This step is often what distinguishes a good essay from a great one. As you may have noticed, we have started the planning process with preparing the main body of the essay. As we have discovered, your arguments are the most important part, so it's good to have them down first. Next, you should start thinking about your introduction, and only when you're done with that should you plan your conclusion. Let us now contrast what we have just learnt about the structure of an essay with the structure of a dissertation. When you write a dissertation, there are a few extra elements you have to consider. A dissertation always starts with an abstract, which is a concise summary of your point of view and your main conclusions. It's usually best to write the abstract once you're done with the main body of your dissertation, so that you know which points are strongest and should be included in your abstract. The purpose of the abstract is to provide a brief overview of your work by clearly stating your research question and highlighting the most important findings and conclusions. The introduction is where you go into more detail on the background of your topic. You should explain the logical basis of your research question and outline any controversial aspects of your topic. Similarly to the introduction of an essay, this is where you reference relevant literature and data sources and explain key terms used in your project. It's good to include a rationale in which you explore the importance of your research question and the reasons you have chosen to explore it. In a dissertation, you have more space to discuss the background of your topic than an essay introduction, but make sure to keep it relevant and necessary for following the rest of your work. Imagine the introduction as an opportunity to bring someone with no background knowledge of your topic up to speed. After reading your introduction, your reader should have all the relevant information to understand your entire dissertation. Your introduction is followed by a literature review. Here you can write about previous work written on your topic and go into more detail on events, key figures, and their social context. You should also use the literature review to evaluate the reliability of your sources. If you'd like to find out more, be sure to watch our video on literature review and finding trustworthy sources. Now we get into the main part, the discussion. It is similar to the main body in an essay in that it contains discussions of your main arguments and evaluates any counter-arguments you can come up with. This is your stage for making your case as to how your research question should be answered. The conclusion and review sections are the logical follow-up to the arguments laid out in your discussion. After reading your discussion, your reader should have understood and been convinced by your point of view. Your conclusion is where you reflect on the main points you have made. It's your chance to think about how the ideas have developed and reiterate the main messages you want your reader to take away from your dissertation. Your review is where you reflect on your research and evaluate how you have answered your research question. The very last part of your dissertation is your bibliography. This is where you list all the sources you used in your research and make it easy for your reader to follow up on any thoughts that may be described in more detail in other work. As you can see, a dissertation has a few extra elements that are missing in an essay, but the main essence of the two is similar. Whether you're writing an essay or dissertation, your aim is to present a clear and convincing case for how your research question should be answered. Planning your dissertation is somewhat different from planning an essay as well. You'll notice that the order of the stages for writing a dissertation is slightly different from the previous slide. In a dissertation, you give a written record of the research you've done in the form of a literature review. You should then dedicate yourself to the most important part of your dissertation, the discussion. In planning your discussion, you should first take time to identify your main arguments, find the counter-arguments you want to address, and then organise your points before you actually start writing. When you're satisfied with your discussion, you can then move on to the conclusion and the review section. And only then should you plan your introduction. This way, you will know exactly which concepts need to be introduced because you rely on them in your discussion. Writing your introduction last will prevent you from giving a generic overview of your topic. Your introduction should be tailored to your dissertation and only describe what your reader needs to understand. It's best to write the abstract last, because you will only know which findings and conclusions to focus on when you're done with the discussion. And conclusion. You may want to write your abstract before the introduction, but if you do so, be careful not to use it as a mini introduction. Your goal here is to present the entirety of your dissertation, not just the background of your topic. As the very last step, you should put together your bibliography. Some dissertations are organised into chapters, with each chapter exploring a different aspect of the topic. In a model like this, you should review the relevant literature and discuss arguments and counter-arguments within each chapter. If you follow this model, you should work your way through the writing stages one chapter at a time and then continue with the stages as we've just discussed. From here on out, we'll look more closely at each of these stages of writing a dissertation. As you might notice, most of what we will discuss for the discussion and introduction section is applicable to preparing to write a normal essay as well. When you think about your literature review, you will have to consider the sources you will rely on. The information you can use can come in many different forms as long as it's from a credible source. For example, you can use data from scientific studies, survey results, text excerpts from books or articles, historical events, and examples from literature. Just make sure to keep track of your sources, as it will help you fast-track putting them all together in your bibliography at the end. And finally, be sure to review our videos on literature reviews and finding trustworthy sources, and also referencing and bibliographies to know what's not a credible source, and also how to write an effective literature review, how to use referencing, and how to write a bibliography. So, in stage 2, you begin to plan your discussion and identify your main arguments. Your literature review will have provided you with an overview of the main aspects that you have to consider in order to discuss your research question. Make a bullet point list of all important points that you find and then use these questions to select your best arguments. 1. Would your case suffer if you didn't address this concern? Focus primarily on the arguments that strongly increase the overall quality of your case. 2. Will you be able to back it up? If you cannot find proof to support your argument, or don't think that the evidence you would use is strong enough, your whole argument will fall apart. It's better to use fewer arguments that are supported by strong evidence, rather than have lots of shaky ones. 3. Is it more convincing than its counter-argument? If your argument could be easily disproved or countered by its counter-argument, it's best not to use it. Anyone who wants to disagree with your claim should have to think hard to find sound arguments to do so. You don't want to help or disprove or go against your own narrative. When you have chosen your arguments, imagine them as part of a whole. Make sure they all work well together. If one of them doesn't feel right in the context, it's better to change it out now before you invest more time in it. Stage 2, organising your arguments. Now it's time to focus on the logic of your dissertation. Taking care in organising your arguments will improve the flow of your writing, so it's worth spending some time thinking about the best way to order your main points. There are no clear-cut rules on how to organise your arguments, but there are a few considerations you should always think of at this stage. Do any of your arguments form the basis for other arguments? If some of your arguments rely on information provided by others, you'll have to use the explaining paragraphs first. Some arguments link to each other more naturally. If so, you can greatly improve the flow of your dissertation if you take advantage of the inherent connections between your points. Are some of your arguments stronger than others? You can order by ascending or descending strength. It all depends on what works well for the internal logic of your dissertation. It does not matter which of these methods you use to order your arguments, but it is crucial that your dissertation has a nice flow. How to make convincing arguments. Once you have chosen your arguments, you want to flesh them out to make them more convincing. Whenever you start a new train of thought, first introduce the topic and then use the peel technique to make your argument more convincing. Peel is point, evidence for example, explain, and then link. It starts off with your point. Clearly and definitively state your argument. Next, evidence, examples. You provide support for your point by giving them an example or citing from text. After that, explain your point further and elaborate on how your evidence supports your point. Last but definitely not least, link. You link your point to your topic and to the next point. This will create a nice flow in your text. Here is an example of a peel paragraph addressing the research question above. Does keeping wild animals in captivity for our entertainment and education do more harm than good? Take a moment to read this paragraph. As you can see, first the author states their point. Then they use the next few sentences in blue to provide evidence of the veracity of the claim. In this paragraph, it's the description of the zoochosis syndrome. Then they explain how the zoochosis syndrome relates to the topic. They explain here, following the evidence that they have provided, that the effects of this condition on animals can lead to premature death, and are proof that wild animals should not live with humans. The author then links their argument back to the research question. They link the suffering of animals to the part of the question talking about more harm than good. Take another moment to look at this quickly. A good follow-up paragraph to this argument would be an examination on how little we actually gain from keeping animals in captivity, to make sure the author is covering all elements of the research question. This example could go further and be made even stronger by providing a response to the counter-argument within the paragraph. The counter-argument within the paragraph here is it's talking about the gain of keeping animals in captivity. Next, addressing counter-arguments. A line of argument can be strengthened if you explicitly consider and respond to counter-arguments. A good way to do this is to ask yourself, what is the strongest argument against what I have just argued? Having stated the counter-argument, often in a new paragraph beginning with, however, it could be argued, you then ask yourself how you would answer it. You could use the following argument to counter the point that we have just made about why animals should not be removed from their natural habitats. However, it could be argued that there are other reasons not connected to animal welfare for removing animals from their natural habitats. Some have suggested that this is necessary for the conservation of endangered species, for example, and this is where you would go into more details on species whose survival is guaranteed by breeding in captivity. You should only present counter-arguments if you can think of a strong response to them. In this case, your response to the counter-argument could be the following. This argument does not, however, prove that current arrangements are generally less harmful than beneficial. It may be the case that there is justification in some cases for protecting some species, but many animals in zoos are themselves not endangered. And then here you could list some species that have strong numbers in the wild, but do not need to be bred in captivity. Do you notice how your case is more convincing now that we have provided a response to the strongest counter-argument? Using counter-arguments shows your reader that you have considered both sides and have logical objections to the other side. So, overall in the discussion, the do's and don'ts. Do clearly state your argument at the beginning of each paragraph. Do find convincing evidence and examples to back up your claim. Feel free to put multiple examples or pieces of evidence for a point, and do consider and respond to counter-arguments. Don't think that your point, evidence, explanation and link have to each fit into a single sentence. Don't mix your arguments. Each new thought should have its own paragraph. And finally, don't forget about the research you did when you wrote your literature review. Stage 3, the conclusion. The stages we have covered so far can be applied to writing essays as well. When you write an essay, you would now move on to the introduction. For dissertations, you should first write your conclusion. The conclusion is where you reflect on how you have answered the main question. Look back at the arguments you have made and ask yourself if you are confident that you have proven your claim. This is where you bring your narrative full circle by reiterating a question and briefly summarising your main points. You also explain to your reader why your interpretation of the issue matters by elaborating on how the topic fits into a wider context. Finally, as part of your dissertation, you should have a section that talks about how your ideas have developed since starting the project and reflect on what you have learned from doing the project itself. This section is called the review section. This is different to the conclusion, and the review section is best if it sits after the conclusion. We will talk about the review section after this. But first, the do's and don'ts in the conclusion. To restate your main question, try to come up with a new way of phrasing it if you can. Do summarise your most cogent arguments in a few words. Do fit your work into a wider context. For example, mention other relevant work on the topic or real-world implications. And don't repeat every small point that you have made in the main body. The conclusion should not sound too repetitive. Finally, don't put any new arguments in the conclusion. As mentioned, the review section is done separately from the conclusion. Whilst your dissertation conclusion focuses on the contents of the project, the review focuses on the project process that you undertook. The review comes after the conclusion and is a chance for you to reflect in detail on the extent to which you have met your project aims, and discuss any limitations of your project, for example, a mention of if you didn't have enough space or scope to include certain things that you thought you might have done when you started the project. Or it could be limitations to do with, for example, the steps you took as part of the project itself. Then it's the possible alterations that you might make in future were you to do the project again, and lessons learned about the research process. The best review sections are honest and, importantly, don't try to cover up gaps or weaknesses in the argument. Good reviews highlight where more evidence would have helped. They are also specific and highlight particular examples of arguments or claims in the dissertation which needed more consideration. The best review sections are also able to give, upon reflection, examples of lessons learned that could be useful for the future were you to undertake a research project again. Stage 4, Introduction. Now that you are done with most of the main body of your dissertation, you should start thinking about your introduction. It may seem slightly odd to leave the introduction until later. However, this makes sense, because you will have a good idea of the summary of your work and therefore how best to introduce it. The following aspects should be considered when writing both essays and dissertations. Your introduction should answer a few key questions. What are you writing about? State the topic of your essay or dissertation. Provide a brief introduction to the topic and explain main terms and events, if necessary. Are there any concept that needs explaining? Are dates or figures that need to be put into a historical context? Now that you have written most of your essay or dissertation, you should know which concepts you should introduce, because you're going to rely on them later. Then you want your reader to be clear on what your stance on the issue is. So phrase your topic clearly so that it's obvious which side of the issue you're on. And lastly, why does it matter? Well, grab your reader's attention. The very first sentence often has a strong influence, so make sure not to waste it. Mention why the topic's important. Allude to a larger context, but don't go into too much detail here. As you plan your introduction, make notes of everything that you will mention, but don't go overboard. Remember that you will already have gone into some detail in other parts of your essay or dissertation that you have written so far. Your introduction gives your reader a solid basis for understanding the rest of your work, so keep it concise. How long your introduction is going to be will depend on the overall length of your essay or dissertation. If you're writing an essay, your introduction will usually consist of one paragraph. If you're writing a dissertation or an extended project qualification, which might take up to 10 pages, your introduction should be somewhere between 1 and 1.5 pages long. Usually, you would write around 800 words. So, the do's and don'ts of the introduction. Do focus on the main issue behind your question. Do give a brief overview of the topic. Explain any main terms and events that are in your question. Do make your topic interesting for your reader. Try to hook their attention from the first sentence. Allude to why the topic matters too. Don't be too exhaustive. You don't need to provide a plot summary or any complete history of events. And don't focus too much on wider context. You want to save that for the conclusion. Stage 5, the abstract. Now that you have written the entire body of your dissertation, you are ready to start working on your abstract. You can think of this as a sort of preview for your reader to decide whether your dissertation contains any information that might be of interest to them. This is not a mini introduction, so don't waste too many words on general background. Write one introductory sentence that shows the importance of the topic. State your research question, main methods, findings and conclusions. Ask yourself, give your reader a concise impression of what they will read in your dissertation. You want your abstract to be clear and strong so that readers want to continue with your entire dissertation after reading it. A final tip on the abstract would be to use Google Scholar Online to see how a variety of different abstracts work and how they can look practically. Abstracts are essentially the trailer for the movie. They're the hook and the introduction for people to read your work further. We are now at the last stage of writing your dissertation, the bibliography, stage 6. This is where you list all relevant resources that you have used throughout your research. In order to make a truly professional bibliography, find the ways that you can always make sure the same format is used for your references, for example, using an online tool that helps you generate references. Make sure each reference is easy to follow up on, as you want to make it easy for your reader to find your sources if they want to do further reading. Finally, be sure to see our video on referencing and bibliographies to find out how to reference properly and tips for writing the bibliography itself. Lastly, some final tips for your essay or dissertation. 1. Take time to plan. It will make writing a lot easier and be worth it in the end. 2. Don't be afraid to go back to the drawing board. It may seem daunting, but making some tweaks doesn't mean that you're starting from scratch. You're just improving the overall quality of your writing. 3. Make your last and first sentence especially intriguing. You want your reader to be invested in your work and for it to leave a lasting impression. So, next steps and further resources. What else can you do to prepare yourself for writing your essay or dissertation? 1. Use our 5 steps to plan a great essay or go through the 6 stages of writing a dissertation. 2. Practice building arguments before you start writing. And 3. Speak to your teacher or supervisor if you're unsure where to find further resources that are specific to your topic and to find out more. With this, you're all set to start your essay or dissertation. Thanks for listening.